Greetings on this wonderful Wednesday. This is Pastor Patrick from the Church on Northland. We are in our second week of our Lenten study, Lent in Plain Sight, a devotion through 10 objects. For those of you who've been following along either at church or online, you know that this devotion takes a different kind of look at the Lenten journey, the journey with Jesus to the cross, and it's a really compelling book, and I think a number of us are already enjoying it. I thought today for the second edition of our Wednesday chats, video chats, that is, that we would look at the unit from Monday, actually, not today's unit, but actually the one from Monday, entitled Bread from Heaven. And the text for that day's lesson was Exodus 16, verses 4 through 12. And I encourage you to read them in your leisure. But before we get going into it, I have a question that I want you to ponder. When you were growing up, did you get to pick what you wanted to eat each night as a child or as a youth or young adult when you were still living at home under the rule and watch of your parents? Did you get to pick what you wanted to eat every night? And I know we didn't. My brothers and I didn't. But if you did not, what happened on those nights that you didn't like what was prepared, or you didn't want to eat what was prepared? Did you get an alternative? Did your parents go get takeout for you? Did they give you some other option? I'm dating myself, but many of us were told, you eat what's put in front of you, you eat what's on the table, or you will go hungry tonight. So my parents, my mother was not at all mean or abusive or anything like that, but she worked hard to provide for us, and she did her best to provide and make sure we never went hungry. And so we learned to appreciate what she did and the labor that went into the wonderful meals that she would put together each night. So we didn't have a choice, and so we, had to deal with whatever was in front of us, even on those nights where liver was being served. And those who know me know I do not like liver at all. But we had to live with it on those nights. I had to eat whatever was on the side. So that was just how we dealt with things, in our household growing up. But I asked the question just kind of as like an icebreaker to get you thinking, get the blood juices flowing about our topic for tonight. And so we're in Exodus, and at this point in text, it's about, depending on what translation you look at and what sort of time calculation or calendar calculation you use, it's either 30 days out or 45 days out from God miraculously delivering his people from Pharaoh. If you know the story, you know that God used Moses, the deliverer, to go to Pharaoh and plead for his people, for their freedom. And after many opportunities that Pharaoh was given to do it, his heart remained hardened, and he and the Egyptians suffered because of it. So at this point, God's people have crossed the Red Sea miraculously on dry land, and Pharaoh's army that had pursued them, even after saying that they could leave, were vanquished in the sea after the Israelites, God's people, were crossed over into dry land. And so you would think they would be in this continuous state of rejoicing and praising God, but not too long after, they got across and were safe on safe ground and began to move forward as God led and directed them to begin to complain. Before the text for Monday's reflection, they had been complaining about not having any water. And so God used Moses to lead them to water so they could have water to drink so they wouldn't die of thirst. And so here we are, about a month later, and now they're complaining again. They're complaining that, if only we had died in Egypt. because in Egypt we had great pots of meat to eat and all the bread we wanted, and we had all we wanted to eat every day, all day. And in Moses, why'd you bring us out here in the desert? And so, and looking at this, I had to kind of laugh to myself, but after initially getting a little, irritated because like, how can you complain about anything after what God has done for you, after you've seen God move miraculously, as after you've been witness from the land of Goshen, where in that plague of darkness that covered the land of Egypt, there was light in Goshen, is just one example. And you saw how God delivered you from Pharaoh. So how can you complain again after seeing God provide and deliver from time and time again? So, but sure enough, God's people, being led by Moses, began to grumble. They began to grumble, about not having any food. And so this unit, this section, Bread from Heaven, sort of looks at this idea of God's provision, of God's meeting needs, and how we appreciate that. One of the I love the way she writes in the examples that Duffield uses, and one of them she uses in this unit is she shared about how a friend of hers would basically tell her, about every good thing that happened to her, and she referred to all those good things as bread from heaven, whether it was much needed money arriving just in time, or a dress that happened to be on sale in her friend's size, or school supplies that were donated to the PTA just in the amount and the type and style of what was needed, or getting a parking spot close to the building on a rainy day. These everything to her friend was, because she called it bread from heaven. And so, do you have any friends like that who they seem to always be praising God for one thing or another, or everything that good that happens to them, they attribute it to God? How do you respond? Do you roll your eyes? Do you shake your head? Do you think to yourself, she just, she's going too far with all that stuff? But I think, and the point that I think Jill Duffield was making is that maybe she's on to something. Maybe she is grasping something that the Israelites, even after seeing all of God's miracles, failed to grasp, failed to appreciate bread from heaven. And she talked, and so that the text talks about how, okay, in response to the grumbling, God provides manna. And if you're familiar with the story, manna is this flaky substance that was left after the dew would lift from the ground. And so it was a strange looking substance, but in the end, though, when they ate it, they said it tasted like wafers made with honey. And so it was the bread that God provided, the bread from heaven, and it was unlike anything they'd ever had, and not like anything probably that they expected. But this is what God provided. God provided the manna, the bread in the morning, and He provided meat in the evening, quail in the evening, and this was God's provision, the bread from heaven from God. And God heard their grumbling and heard their mumbling against Him, and people were complaining to Moses and Aaron, but Moses and Aaron pointed out, look, I hope you know who it is you're complaining and grumbling about. When you complain and grumble to us about what we did or what we didn't do, you're actually complaining against God, because it's God who brought us all here. It's God who delivered us. It's God who parted the Red Sea and enabled us to move on dry land. It's God that vanquished Pharaoh and his army when they wanted to renege on the decision to let you go. It was God, it was God, it was God. And so you need to know, folk, who you're complaining against. And so and one of the things that Defo points out is that at a certain point, even with God answering their plea, answering not their prayers, but their grumbling, because God had compassion on the people. And so he answered them. He provided them the manna in the morning and the quail in the evening. But if you keep reading in the book of Exodus, you'll know that at a certain point, the people got complacent with that and got disappointed and disaffected with that. They wanted something else. They wanted something different. They didn't want the manna anymore. They weren't satisfied with it. And so this was another example of this cycle with God's people, unfortunately, of mumbling and grumbling and moaning, complaining, and not appreciating what God had provided. And I love how Duffield covers this, and she's basically said that Moses informed the people that God would provide bread from heaven, but not too long after that, they took it for granted and began to crumble and complain some more, not realizing that, and this is one of the quotes, everything, absolutely everything, from dresses to job offers, from breath to a day at the beach, is in fact bread from heaven, a gift, a blessing, something worth celebrating. And so, yeah, she makes the connection from, how the Israelites mumble, groan, and moan and complain, and how we sometimes, even after God's blessed us tremendously, mumble and grumble and moan and complain. And so and I ask for all of us, both you and me, to really take stock of what God has done in each of our lives, and to look and to be careful in those times we're tempted to complain, those times we're tempted to not appreciate God's bread from heaven. So I encourage you this week to look around, pay attention to every wonderful thing, every good thing, big and small, that you notice that happens to you, and consider whether this might be bread from heaven. I'll share with you the prayer from the end of this unit, which I think is a great one. And it says, God of heaven and earth, in you we live and move and have our being. Everything we have comes from you, every breath, every moment, every relationship, every provision. The earth is yours and all that is within it. Help us this day to marvel at your lavish care for us, and to hear our thanks as we gather the bread from heaven that you give us every single day. In Christ's name, amen. All right, folks, love you. Be blessed.